Hi again. Carrying on with this crazy screw thread that I've been making, let's pick up where I left off. Recall that I had made a helix and I'd used a circular profile cut with it to make what looked kind of like a screw thread but wasn't very correct. Let's fix that. So here we are back. I've backed up a little bit, so I've taken away the cut and I'm left with just the screw thread. Now I've also cheated a bit and gone to make sure that this is going to work for you, so that I'm not wasting too much time fiddling around with it. With more complicated commands like this, as you probably know by now, sometimes you get yourself muddled around until you find exactly what the software designers intended for the parameters, and then you can make it work. Well, I fiddled around with this and then I've come back and I'm going to show you the way that I've completed this with a proper looking screw thread. So here we are, and I've got the helix, and what I'd said at the last video was that rather than use a circular profile for the cut, just to refresh your memory, I was using a swept cut here, and I picked a circular profile and it weights a bit, and I picked 4 millimeters or something like that, and you got this kind of a look. And then it gave us a screw thread that just didn't look right. So I don't want to do that again. I'm going to make something better. So the first thing I did was create a plane. Now the way to create a plane in this case is to go to reference geometry, select plane, and then in the case of this, picking the first reference and multiple references of what's going to define the plane. In my case, I picked the end of the helix to define the plane, and it already automatically in this case knew that the end of the helix was to be perpendicular and it was to be coincident with that point. So that was pretty easy to give me a plane that was exactly what I was looking for. And you can see as I roll it around that that plane actually is normal or perpendicular to the direction of the helix. Now I've already created that, like so, to make sure that this was going to work. So I've created the plane, and then the next thing to do was to make a sketch on that plane. So if I select sketch in the tools option, and I select for a new sketch, and I pick the plane, now it's letting me draw something on this plane. I can, in this case, I can select that I want to view that plane, and I'm not actually looking at that plane. I can pick view orientation, and one of these is normal to the plane. So now I'm actually looking at the plane that I'm drawing on. And I'm just going to draw some kind of random thread profile, like so. And I can play around with the dimensions for this. I think I can play around with the dimensions for this. I didn't want to mess up with anything like that. Oops. I was still drawing a line when I thought I was not. These are the points where, after you've been using SolidWorks for a while, you will learn to curse at it. At least I have. I'm trying not to in these videos, and I hope you appreciate that my normally salty engineering language is been cleaned up a little bit for this. And so I'm just making that profile, and I could set some dimensions. I'm going to save that. And now I have a little sketch that, as you can see here, is perpendicular to the helix. Well, I've already done this, and then simply went in and did a sweep cut where I used a sketch that I drew and created a profile that looks an awful lot like a screw thread. So rather than using the one that was not too realistic looking, I'm using one that actually looks okay. There, I hid that helix because it was making my screw thread look wonky. You'll see that there's a bit of a funny shape around here at the starting point, but I'm not going to be too worried about that. There's one thing about this screw thread that is odd, though. If you notice and you think about how you would turn this screw thread to advance it, it's actually what we would call a left-hand thread, and that's not normal for most screws. So if I was making a really unique custom screw, then this would be perfect. But if I wanted this to be a right-hand screw, I would have to redo the modeling, or going back and just editing the direction of the helix, I could fix that. Single button, clockwise, counterclockwise. I select counterclockwise, and oop, it didn't like some of the definitions that I had. So I'll have to go back in and fix up this this sketch plane that I've got. Interestingly, it's now redefined my sketch as something totally wonky. Trying to select the things that you want to select is a challenge sometimes. There. So the problem there was that I was viewing it from the back side of the plane, and so it thought I was selecting something different. In this view mode, it likes to select the thing that is the first thing between you, the viewer, and the plane. So what I really want to do is change the dimensions of my thread cut into something like that. And that starts to look more like what I had intended. I can mess around with the dimensions to get a proper looking cut, but that's the idea. So was this fun? No, it's not. But then one of the things you'll find, I certainly find with SolidWorks, is that you run along and things work great, and then you run into things that don't quite work the way you expect them, and that's okay. Relax, take a deep breath, and those things that you do that don't quite work, eventually, if you're patient enough and you're stubborn enough, you'll sort a way through them, and you can ask for help. So that's the screw thread. Now, before we're finished here, you're thinking, do I have to do all that work just to design every screw and or nut or bolt or something that I want to design? Well, no, you don't, thankfully, because you'll notice that in SolidWorks there are, over on the right hand side, you'll see that there's a bunch of things in what's called a design library. And the design library has, if you select that, it has parts. And in those parts, you'll find hardware. You'll find all kinds of things that you've never thought of before. And you can scroll around in there and you can find actual cool stuff. For instance, in the toolbox, we're going to look at Canadian parts. Actually, there's not too much there. Let's look at ANSI metric bolts and screws. We can look at machine screws. We can look at pan head machine screws, and these you can simply drag and drop anywhere. So all that work of making this thing, of course, I made the dimensions huge. This is unrealistic. An actual part you might want to use, you'll find in the library for common standard parts like this. And that's really helpful. In the next video, I'll show you an equally helpful place to look for parts, because we don't want to start redesigning everything and redrawing everything. You'll find an awful lot in the toolboxes when you install SolidWorks, and you'll find even more online in a few sources I'll show you next. See you later on. Thanks for watching.